Hi, everybody. Mitch Tanenbaum here. Thanks for joining me today. This is the security news update for the week ending May 1st, 2022. First story is a story about a terrorism attack in France. Some folks unknown who decided they were going to go off and start cutting fiber optic cables that are located around the Paris area. These are the high-speed cables that connect Paris and the rest of the world to different regions of France. At this point, we don't know who is responsible for it. No one is claiming responsibility for it, but it points to how vulnerable these kinds of infrastructure are to attack. In one case, the fiber was in a conduit on the side of a bridge or tunnel, and it looks like all they did was cut it with a sawzall. In another case, it looks like the fiber was in a box in the ground, which is a lot of places where you see that, and they just cut the fiber. This is very, very time consuming, very difficult to splice. And it sounds like these guys knew what they were doing, but there's no reason why this couldn't happen in the United States or any other place. So from that perspective, um, you know, there's not a lot we can do to go protect ourselves from it, but it does point to the fact that the bad guys have the upper hand of things like this. Next, in a follow-on to Apple's announcement that they planned to allow users finally to repair their own phones instead of fighting them tooth and nail, they've actually launched their self-service repair store in partnership with iFixit, and you can now buy tools and parts, the same tools and parts that Apple uses. This does not mean that it is easy to fix iPhones. It just means that Apple is not fighting you. And then on the other side of the fence, on the Android side of the world, Apple, announced the ability to have a proxy server where you can route your internet traffic through Apple to make it difficult for people to track you. And they also announced that they will, not that they will, they are going off and forcing people who put apps in the App Store to tell you what they're doing with your data. Now Google is doing the same thing. They're also, they've added a data safety section for all apps in the App Store. And so they're trying to, I think this is an attempt to compete with, fair enough, to compete with Apple. And then Microsoft has announced their version of Apple's proxy server called Microsoft Edge Secure Network. It's similar to what Safari is doing in that it routes traffic through their servers. In the case of Microsoft, they're using Cloudflare. The only downside to the Microsoft offering is that you only get 1 gigabyte of traffic for free, which is not very much in today's world. We do not know how much they're going to charge for more than that. So until we know that, really, at this point, we don't know how competitive their offering is going to be. Under important issues and privacy, Google is now going to let you, under some circumstances, remove your PII from their search results. Note that this does not in any way, shape, or form remove that data from the internet. It also does not remove the data from anybody else's search results. But at least it's a start. And if you find stuff like bank account information, credit card information, ID documents, stuff like that online, you can ask Google to remove it. We'll see. They claim they will, so I'm hoping they will. In terms of breach reporting, this is getting really challenging for folks these days. It used to be that you had somewhere between 30 and 90 days to report breaches under state breach laws. Effective Monday, banks will have 36 hours to notify the FDIC of a security incident. Under the proposed SEC rules, which are now in kind of draft form and out for comment, publicly traded companies will have 4 days to report a breach. Under CIRCA, which is now law, critical infrastructure, which is actually a lot of different companies, you'd be surprised what they consider critical infrastructure, now must report breaches to CISA within 72 hours and report ransomware payments within 24 hours. But not to be outdone, India is about to enact a law that requires their critical infrastructure folks to notify the government within 6 hours of a breach. This is not the end of this. This is going to continue. And the challenge that many companies have is they don't really have a great incident response program. They don't have the ability to easily go off and collect even a minimal amount of data to report the breach to the government in a short period of time. So, you know, excuse me, plan for that and get ready, because likely this is the trend of the future. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is said that they're going to go off and use an authority that they already have, but which they've really not used, to go after fintechs. From the consumer standpoint, there's really no difference in the harm that a non-bank entity that handles your money can do versus a bank entity that handles your money. And so this is a win for consumers. It's also a win for banks, because they've said that they're being held to a standard up until now that the fintechs have not been held to. But I'm sure the fintechs are not at all happy that the CFPB is going to be looking under their mattress to see what's going on. But I think it's about time this happened. Under the education section, the FDA has released a draft guidance on medical device security. My opinion is a little too late, but is better than nothing. Right now, medical device security is really, really horrible, and anything we can do to go improve that would be a good thing. So I'm hoping that this actually becomes a regulations in draft form, and comments are due by July 7th, as I recall. And so I'm hoping this becomes the actual regulations, and this is the start of something good for consumers. Next, in the area of breaches, the state of Alaska has discovered that cybersecurity is a real thing, and you really do need to spend some money and do some stuff. Last month, the state's Department of Revenue Permanent Fund was under attack. That's the part where they give dividends to Alaska residents every year. So there's a lot of money there. So there's strong motivation. They had 800,000 attempted attacks in a short period of time. They didn't say how short that was. They shut down the network and waited for the attackers to leave. But over the last year, both the State Department of Health and Social Services and the state court system were hacked. 11 months after the social services attack, parts of that network are still down, forcing consumers to, get out their pencil and piece of paper to go off and make requests for government services. The challenge is that cybersecurity is not sexy. Governors would like to do things like, I don't know, roll out something that's shiny and they can point to, or reduce taxes or something like that. But they've discovered this is a leaky boat, and it's also not sexy to force consumers to get out a pencil to go off and interact with their state government. That doesn't work very well. So they're between a bit of a rock and a hard place here. They have asked for tens of millions of dollars of money, no doubt long overdue. And we know that the public sector is continuing to get slammed because they really haven't spent the money on cybersecurity for a variety of different reasons, mostly budget. But it's really a matter of priority on the part of the government. Either they prioritize it or they will continue to get hacked. So we shall see where that goes. But at least Alaska is trying to put a few Band-Aids on the leaky boat. Next, T-Mobile was compromised again. In this particular case, the hackers bought some credentials from the Ruskies and stole source code rather than stealing personal information. Obviously, that allows the bad guys to go off and look for vulnerabilities, which I'm sure there are lots of, and they will probably sell the source code as well. So all of that works well for the hackers. T-Mobile tried to put some lipstick on the pig and say, well, at least this time they didn't steal customer information, which I guess if you're a customer, maybe that is attractive, but I'm not quite clear that that really makes much of a difference to the consumer. Also, Kansas Hospital Network, the Newman Regional Hospital, was breached for almost a year before the breach was detected. The hacker stole information on 50,000 patients, and I mean, it's like everything. It's, names, medical records, birth dates, email addresses, phone numbers, addresses, treatment information, employee information. So not good. I'm sure they will get whacked by fines and also get sued. But in the meantime, they're trying to close the hole and stop the bleeding. Next, in what I think is going to be something to watch with popcorn and possibly a beer. The EU has sort of agreed to what was going to be in the Digital Services Act, which is that online providers like Twitter can be fined up to 6% of their global revenue for a first offense for not removing harmful content. Now, Twitter has got a bit of a checkered past, and Musk would like to put even more harmful content online. He probably will follow the law. I mean, I don't anticipate he's not going to follow the law, but he's going to have some hard decisions to make. Do they bifurcate Twitter and create two versions of Twitter, one which is available in countries that have laws like the Digital Services Act, which will be more than just the EU, and that would go off and reduce content, for say, I'm just making something up, 500 million to 1 billion people. He already said he wants to try to figure out how to increase revenue, and the whole thing about social media is to go rile people up. So if you're forced to take down content that is designed to rile people up and which is demonstrably false, that probably reduces your revenue opportunity. So it's going to be an interesting challenge, not only for Elon, but also for other social media folks. So, stay tuned for that. And I strongly anticipate that other countries will follow in the EU's footsteps. And what is the kind of the first of its kind, there's a digital bank, which is a fancy word for a bank that deals in cryptocurrency instead of hard cash, that got its OCC approval in 2019. It was a set of operating agreements that the bank was supposed to follow. They did not. The OCC winded them a number of times, and finally they said, "We're done with this. We're going to sue you." And finally, the bank said, "Okay," and they agreed to this fairly long consent decree. It requires the bank to do a lot of stuff, and it requires them to do some of it on a very short fuse. But I think this is going to be the benchmark for what the OCC is going to be doing with other digital banks that want to get licenses to operate in the United States. Fundamentally, I mean, there's nothing there that other banks aren't doing, right? You have to have a compliance committee, you have to follow the Bank Secrecy Act, you have to complete suspicious activity reports, you have to know who your customers are, all the things that cryptocurrency people don't want to do, right? There's kind of two things, in my opinion, that cryptocurrency people do. One is speculate, which is perfectly legal, and the other is do shady stuff, which is typically not legal, and why they're trying to use cryptocurrency. And that puts these digital banks kind of in a between a rock and a hard place, right? Because their reason for being is, for the most part, I mean, to be fair, to help people flout the law, and now they're going to get their charter taken away if they don't clean up their act, at least to some degree. So we'll see, how this goes, but it's definitely going to be interesting, and I think this is the benchmark for what these other charters, which are pending, are going to need to do. Again, in the area of law, there's this thing called dark patterns. Dark patterns basically is a subtle way to go off and swindle people by confusing them, by making it hard for them to unsubscribe from things, to make them think they're doing one thing when they're doing a different thing. And it's against the law in some places today. It will be against the law in other places next year. And everybody that runs a website probably needs to understand the concept of dark patterns because even if you don't do it intentionally, you don't really want to run afoul of the law. It's just not a great thing. So one of the big credit bureaus got whacked over that, is actually being sued. So I think this is probably something that businesses need to think about. Next, in the world of the Department of Defense, the CMMC process is slowly grinding through. We're getting a little bit of additional information. It's still going to be quite a while before this thing is fully baked. But on the other hand, there's stuff under the current law that people really need to be doing, which is really pretty similar to what's going to be required for CMMC. So if you are not fully compliant with what's in the current law, now is a good time to go do that, so that when CMMC comes out and you get the final details of what's required there, you will be in a position to more quickly comply with that and get your certification that's required. And lastly, under Security News Bites, SunGard, the grandparent, grandfather, grandmother, whatever, of Disaster Recovery Services, has filed for bankruptcy again, the second time in just a couple of years. Fundamental problem for SunGard is their business model is now permanently and forever broken, and they need to come up with a new business model. So that's going to be interesting. Questions being asked about whether there's any return to normalcy of the supply chain. And based on the stuff that I'm reading, it's not happening anytime soon. We're still seeing, for tech stuff like high-end network gear and servers stuff, 6 to 12 month lead time. What that means for companies is you need to plan ahead to get your stuff, because you may not be able to get the stuff that you want to get. You may be forced to get other stuff, which is not the stuff you want to get, because the stuff you want to get is not available. In the cloud world, Amazon AWS bundled up a contract with the CIA. It's got to be at least 5 years ago now, maybe more, to build them a private, highly classified, highly secure cloud network. And then that was before people understood the money that was involved there. That particular contract was worth about $10 billion. Then the DoD tried to go off and do that with something called JEDI. It was really a horrible disaster. After 5 years of trying to come to some kind of agreement, the DoD canceled that RFP completely, and is letting a new RFP. Is still going to be years. In the meantime, AWS just locked up a cloud contract to build the same thing they built for the CIA for the NSA. So they pretty well have the intelligence community pretty well locked up at this point. Microsoft complained about the NSA contract last year. The NSA went off and rebid it, still gave it to Amazon. So that leaves the only one big contract that is still outstanding is the DoD contract, and hopefully Microsoft will get a piece of that. I think what's going to happen with the DoD contract is going to be multi-cloud. It's not going to be a single provider. So that would be a way to minimize the pain, and they're going to say, hey, we're going to give everybody some money. Next, Brazil Senate passed a bill to regulate cryptocurrency, just like regular currency. And they also plan to issue a cryptocurrency that's pegged to the real or real, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, their actual currency. I'm not exactly sure what the purpose of that is, because if it's pegged to the currency, why don't you just go off and use the currency? But anyway, I think we're going to see more and more of this, where they're going to just regulate. The plan in Brazil is to regulate it just like a bank, just like a regular currency, which takes some of the fun out of the speculators model, but it does add some significant protections to the consumers. So that's a good thing. And lastly, there was a non-binding resolution that was signed onto by about 60 nations, including the United States and all of the EU, amongst others, not to undermine future elections using misinformation and disinformation. And guess what? Russia and China and India decided they didn't want to go down that road. They thought misinformation, disinformation was a good thing, and they want to continue to be able to use that. So they said, no, we're not going to go sign that. So it just kind of tells you where people are at. Not a big surprise, I guess. But that's all we have for this week. You can check out our audio and video podcast at cybersecurity.us, spelled the way we spell cybersecurity. And until next week, thank you for joining me. Take care.
Turnkey Cybersecurity and Privacy Solutions offers the complete cybersecurity program for small to medium-sized businesses. They include everything needed to secure your business and meet compliance requirements. Visit our website at turnkeycybersecurityandprivacysolutions.com to learn more.